So good morning, everybody. It's Emma here from Future of Leadership. Thank you so much for joining us today for our October webinar with Rebecca Tapp. Today's topic is going to be called Evolve, Igniting Turning Points. Now, during this webinar, if you do have any questions, just pop them in the chat box and we will answer them at the end. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about Rebecca before I hand over to her. As a speaker and consultant, Rebecca Tapp assists industry leaders, CEOs, entrepreneurs, and media personalities to activate purpose-driven influence. She's spent more than a decade working in collaboration with globally acclaimed speakers, activists, authors, and influencers. Rebecca is the CEO and founder of the Supernova founded in 2015. The Supernova Tribe is a content agency for business influencers, industry leaders, creatives, and talent on a mission to ignite purpose-driven profile. She's also the host of the Decoding Purpose podcast and a director of the cult thought leader brand Future Crunch, who are on a mission to foster intelligent, optimistic thinking about the future. As a speaker, Rebecca is quick-witted and strategic, which I am sure we will experience today. On the flip side, she is also heart-centered, deeply empathetic, and believes in the creation of a purpose-driven world anchored in the creation of a more hopeful and human-centric tomorrow. So I'm about to hand over to Rebecca. She is going to take us through her presentation today. As I said, if you have any comments or questions, pop them in the chat box, and then I will hop back on at the end to finish off. So Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Emma, and thank you for the introduction. I have to say it's truly a pleasure to be involved in anything associated with Hands Across the Water and, of course, the Future of Leadership. Pete Baines was one of the first speakers I represented in my early days in the industry, and he is one of the reasons that I became so purpose-driven myself, in that he certainly was a speaker who I knew every time he got on stage was using his influence to truly change the world. So I'm really honored to be included in the Future of Leadership webinar series. And without further delay, thank you everyone for joining me on today's presentation. Now, today, as Emma has already mentioned, we will be focusing on how we ignite turning points to evolve a deeper connection to our personal purpose. Now, this picture that you see here is the cover of my podcast, which, as you can see, is called Decoding Purpose. To give you a bit of background info on my world, I actually started this podcast at the beginning of 2019 because in truth, I was a little bit frustrated that there seemed to be so much confusion around A, what purpose is all about, and B, whether it is a topic that is really worth the time, the energy, and the attention of leaders or of leaders in life. See, I think traditionally purpose has kind of been thrown into the corporate social responsibility bucket, which is a nice feel-good bucket, but it has not necessarily been considered an integral part of business operations, or more significantly, an integral part of the human resources strategy. So for me personally, I was quite frustrated by this disconnect, because I think in an age that is being redefined by emerging technologies, a sense of purpose is the one thing that is innately human. The only thing that can program purpose is, the life experience of a human being and the meaning that we assign to our personal lives, our professional lives, and of course the legacy that we leave for future generations. And when I talk about meaning, I'm not specifically talking about the technicality of words or the cognition of the mind, which, let's face it, with artificial intelligence can be programmed. What I'm talking about today is the meaning that we find in the heart, in the emotion we experience and convey, and in the moments of magic that cannot be planned or replicated. I'm not talking about purpose as a socially constructed idea of one's identity, but as a core part of our inner self. So in coming back to why I started the podcast, I very much wanted to help leaders to understand the true nature of purpose, not as an overarching statement of why we or our business exists, but as a fundamental part of who we are. That said, back in 2019, having worked with professional speakers my entire career, as Emma has already mentioned, I knew that my opinion was not enough to build any credible point of view around why purpose was who we are rather than why we exist. So instead, I did my own research, and that has led to, as of today, 66 conversations and 66 podcast episodes, all with one intention: to decode purpose. So today I want to share with you what I have learned about the true nature of purpose in the stories that I've heard. Now, when people think about purpose, some might call it professional purpose, or others, personal purpose. Some like to think of organizations as having a purpose, or they like the idea that charity work is what purpose is. And what I want to say is that they are all expressions of what purpose is in motion, but at the core of all of these ideas is one common denominator, and that is that purpose is human, and that any form of purpose must start with the human first approach. We must have a bottoms up approach to purpose in business as well, and really look to purpose as being a core part of our human resources strategy. It's, the way I like to think of it is you can't retrofit purpose. You can't just give someone a charity that they feel aligned with. They need to go within first in order to be able to understand what is meaningful for them within the context of their lives. Now, in looking at some of the things I have discovered about the most purposeful human beings that I've interviewed, nearly all of them, either via a choice or in some cases a crisis, have discovered purpose in a turning point moment. So with that in mind, I made a decision at the end of 2019 that I would theme season 2 of the podcast around turning points. Another example of purpose being serendipitous, I guess, was the fact that I had no idea that within weeks of theming the decoding purpose around turning points, that we would be experiencing the most devastating bushfires to occur in Australia, followed by droughts, the outbreak of a global pandemic, or the emergence of global protests as a part of the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, I think it's fair to say that 2020 has been way bigger than a turning point. As you will see right here on this slide, it has been a tornado. So let's have a chat about turning points. How do we define them? By definition, a turning point is when a situation starts to change in an important way. So along with the podcast, over the last 15 years, I have literally had conversations with some of the brightest people on the planet, people like Peter Baines, about how they discovered their purpose. And it doesn't seem to matter how smart, how spiritually evolved, or how sophisticated somebody is. Turning point moments have an ability to literally pour a bucket of ice cold water over our heads, and they wake us up like no other event can. So in a conversation about turning points, especially in the emergence of a global pandemic, which has undeniably been one of the biggest turning points humankind has ever faced over the last century, we need to really start to consider the impact of these moments. And we know in 2020, as we are all aware, hundreds and thousands of human lives have been lost. And that doesn't include the livelihoods lost. Nonetheless, wrapped around the COVID turning point is an even bigger storm, and that is the storm of climate change. Now, as terrifying as all of this is, there are parts of me that are also curious. I'm curious as to why humankind will so often wait for life-defining moments like the pandemic to evolve, whereas others choose to proactively create change. And I ask this question because as leaders, if we could proactively choose to pioneer a solution before a crisis of any scale, I'm sure we would take that action. But the reality is that for many of us, we choose not to look within to see A, what problem we know how to solve before it becomes a crisis, or B, we are not yet ready to acknowledge the fact that as leaders, our job is not to respond to the future. Our job is to create it. After all, the future is unknown, and the reason for that is because the future is unwritten. It is no longer relevant to look to, futurists to decode the next economy. What we need to understand is that this is an unwritten economy. The real question is this: as leaders, where do we begin in writing it? My answer is that we choose purpose before it chooses us. We choose purpose before we need a crisis to wake us up. The thing is, if we look around us at this point in time, we are already in an age of change. The turning points are no longer waiting for us to wake up because they are already here. The question is no longer, will there be a wake-up call? In 2020, the alarm has gone off, and these turning points will only get louder if we continue to ignore which is no longer sustainable, what is no longer sustainable for the future of humanity. Some of you may have heard of Sonia Renee Taylor. If you haven't, she's an author, poet, spoken word artist, speaker, and humanitarian. And I think she summed up the power of the unwritten economy when she said this: "We will never go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. My friends, we are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and all of nature. And we also have the tools available to stitch a new garment. We exist in an age where digitization has empowered us all with the voice and the influence to drive meaningful conversations more so than ever before. Conversations that start with one sign held by the Greta Thunbergs of the world, or with one speech like Emma Gonzalez's March for Lives speech against gun control, like the Me Too movement, or more recently, the Black Lives Matter protests. We are in the age of corporate activism where brands also have the power to own their voice and to influence social change by making products and delivering on services for the greater good. Despite the difficulties of 2020, there is still so much that we can be hopeful about with regards to the resources we have to create real and sustainable change, the kind where it is still possible for us to create an inclusive, peaceful, and abundant future. As future leaders, we have the power to use our voice and to influence that change, but we need to make a conscious and clear decision around what it is we desire to change. The question is, who are you in the world, and what part do you play? Ultimately, that is a choice that is fundamentally reflected in our purpose, not because we are clear on our statement of why. After all, a statement of why is simply a collection of words. The answer lies in being clear on who we are and what we are capable of. Once we are clear on who, we can then assign meaning to that and find a narrative to talk about our purpose. But let's not start with words. Let's start with truth-telling, heart and feeling. Let's go within first and ask ourselves, who are we and what really matters? Last Friday on the podcast, I interviewed the author of a book called The Inner Self, The Joy of Discovering Who We Really Are. And the book is available on the bookshelves at the moment. The author is a man named Hugh Mackay, and he's now an incredible man in his 80s. He's a social researcher and psychologist, and he said in the book that the one question that we as human beings are the most reluctant to answer in becoming all of who we are and in connecting with our inner self is this: what will be required of me if I get to the core of who I am? And I'm going to repeat that question again. What will be required of me if I get to the core of who I am? So we have to ask, why are we so reluctant to answer that question? What are we afraid of? And why do we shy away from what is really required of us to connect with who we really are? Now, for any of you who have children, I have a 2-year-old, you may have seen the Disney movie Moana, where she sings the song, Where Are You? And funnily enough, this song was literally on repeat over the weekend with my 2-year-old. And so I was listening to the words, and in the song, Moana struggles with the expectations of her role within her island tribe and the expectations of her father versus her true calling to be a warrior of the sea. And if we think about it, for her to go to sea as a metaphor for purpose, she must be brave and face the unknown in order to save her island. But to do that, she must first break the rules to create a new destiny for herself and her tribe. Amazingly, there is quite a lot of wisdom found on the Disney Channel, but some of you may feel yourself in the words of this song. You are your father's daughter, stubbornness and pride. Mind what he says, but remember, you may hear a voice inside. And if that voice starts to whisper to follow the furthest star, Moana, that voice inside is who you are. There you go. Love a bit of Disney to lighten things up. But in coming back to the question, Hugh Mackay said, where we are all reluctant to answer, let's consider this. What will be required of me if I get to the core of who I am? And who you are is where you are going to discover your connection to purpose. And this question really opened my mind to the idea that purpose is no different. We all say we want a sense of purpose. We want to feel a deeper level of fulfillment and have more meaning in our lives. But are we really willing to do what is required to become that person? Are we willing to stop waiting for purpose, to stop waiting for a tipping point or a turning point to wake us up? Remembering that these turning points can be personal as well. They might come in the form of sickness or divorce or a relationship meltdown. There are lots of versions of how turning points, personal, professional, or planetary, come into our lives. And are we really willing to do the work required to become all of who we are in order to experience a deeper connection to the energy of purpose in our lives? And are we willing to let that purpose guide us towards pioneering brand new solutions, to stitch a new garment, to create a more peaceful and abundant world? If the answer is yes, then where do you begin on that journey? Marianne Williamson so beautifully summed the choices we make as human beings in the process of becoming all of who we are when she said this: our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is not our light. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us the most. As a podcast host and expert on purpose, at the beginning of this year, I felt that I was pretty certain, pretty rock solid about what purpose was. I didn't really think there was any need to evolve my understanding of it, but 2020 certainly had different plans for everyone, and this year has asked us to evolve in the most unexpected ways. No stone has been left unturned. And for me personally, prior to March of this year, I had always felt that purpose was something that in many ways existed in the future. It is something we are working towards that propels us to transform. I often spoke about purpose as the process of the caterpillar becoming the butterfly, with the core focus always being on the beauty of the butterfly representing the future self, rather than realizing the magic and the purpose is found in the entire process of becoming, that the purpose is found in the caterpillar, in the cocoon, and in the butterfly. And the evolution that happens when we change is where we find that magic. And to give you a pragmatic example, the North Star, which you see in front of you in this slide, has often been considered to be a metaphor for purpose. It sits out in front of us in the future and acts as a navigation tool which propels us forward. It makes sense that this was a great symbol for purpose, but it doesn't address one major problem. That problem being, what happens when there are storms or when there are clouds in the sky and we can no longer see that North Star? We no longer have vision of that North Star. What happens when the future we thought we were traversing towards suddenly becomes uncertain and unknown, and all of a sudden that North Star has no significance in guiding us anywhere? As both an entrepreneur and an expert on purpose, pre-COVID, I felt as though I literally had an elastic band between my symbolic North Star and where I was in the present moment, including the actions I was taking to create my future. It was like there was this tension, literally an elastic band between my present self and my future self. And that made me feel, I guess, a sense of engagement with the world around me. That is what I thought purpose was that tension. And basically, because of that tension, it was also where I was generating my personal energy to keep showing up for my future dreams. And the interesting thing for me is once COVID hit, I felt like someone had literally cut that elastic band in half, or that energy cord between me and my future had literally been dissolved. Now, I think it's fair to say that really the whole world was in a state of shock upon realizing the full impact of COVID. But for me, there was definitely a few months where I genuinely felt like I'd lost my vibrancy, and where in cutting that elastic band, I literally felt like I had been thrown onto the ground with no momentum to get back up. And the truth is, as leaders, that is not a choice we have. We absolutely have to get back up. And the problem for me was, how do you get back up when the future you thought you were creating is now surrounded not only by unknowns, but unknown unknowns? Over those few months, like so many of us, I did a lot of thinking and I have asked some pretty big questions. And I think for so many of us, we are still in this deep dive of introspection. And one of the good things, I guess, about COVID was that we jumped off the relentlessness of being busy, and it's given us an opportunity to simply be, to go within and to start to look inside ourselves for what Moana called the voice inside, the inner knowing. And it was then that I realized that the North Star never actually existed in the future. It was never ever really attached to my goals or ambitions or to my dreams. And my personal energy was not something that was fueled by anything outside of myself. It was fueled by the stillest parts of myself. It was fueled by the universe making itself known in me, in my expression. And what I realized is that this North Star, it lives inside us. It is our compass. We experience purpose here in the present moment. And our job is not to find purpose or to look for purpose. Purpose is in who we already are. The real work to decode purpose starts with the realization that within each of us is a star that does not need to try and be anything other than the potential of what it already is. This is our DNA. The embryo does not try to become a baby, or the acorn an oak tree, and that's another line from Marianne Williamson. Our purpose does not need us to try and find it. It wants us to discover ourselves, to remember who we really are. Carl Sagan was quoted as saying, "Somewhere something incredible is waiting to be known. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself. For small creatures such as we, the vastness is bearable only through love." What I want you to know is your purpose is found in the star stuff, but the star you seek doesn't exist in the north. It is a part of who you have always been. The journey into purpose begins only by looking within, looking into our DNA, the unique code holding the potential for all of human life. Bear with me while I have a sip of my coffee here. So today we are going to talk about how we evolve in life's turning points, or taking that one step further, how do we evolve before we actually need a turning point? So with that in mind, I want to introduce you to something that I call the DNA of purpose. And this is a framework that I have developed to help us get clear on who we are and how today we can connect with purpose. Now, to give you some background, it was around 5 years ago when I started to hear the voice of my purpose in a more conscious way. A mission which today is crystal clear, and that is to decode purpose, to explore what purpose is and to break down the process of uncovering, discovering, and directing our purpose, to pull on a golden thread to unravel the ultimate question: what is the meaning of one's life? Now, while in many ways this mission was encoded into the core of my being from day one, becoming conscious of my purpose led me to a turning point where I was invited to take a leap of faith. And that leap was to explore how I could distill something as grand, lofty, and expansive as our purpose into something concise, something that made sense, to create a finite framework around an infinite and endless possibility. And as it turns out, like so many things in life, I didn't actually have to look very far, because nature usually has the answers if we are wise enough to open our eyes to what is in front of us. And it's no coincidence that the right message will always arrive at precisely the right time. And for me, that message arrived when I met the incredible co-founders of Future Crunch, Dr. Angus Harvey and Tane Hunter, two humans who today I'm proud to call my business partners. And I know you'll be hearing from Future Crunch in the next Future of Leadership webinar series. Now, in short, Future Crunch is a thought leadership brand and a media company built upon an ethos of intelligent optimism. So not the rainbows and unicorn type, but the scientific type. The golden plated facts that tell an optimistic narrative about the state of the world. And despite no formal training in science, this was where my inner science nerd was born, I guess you could say. Now, to quote Carl Sagan for the second time, science is more than a body of knowledge. It is a way of thinking. So today we are going to use science to begin to unpack a framework to understand how we can better connect with what purpose is. Now, I've spent hours in conversation with Angus and Tane learning about this magical code for life known as deoxyribonucleic acid. And in the reflection of DNA, I began to see the patterns of human purpose emerge. I began to view purpose using scientific thinking as my tool to give it form and to give it reason. After all, if there was a way to define and decode the purpose of life, surely the answer existed within life itself. In addition to that, scientific thinking always carries with it a level of certainty, but it is never certain. There is always room for more information, insight, or innovation. Nothing is static, meaning new information or new data can completely flip your perspective on anything from our knowledge of microbiomes, the mating habits of a turtle crab, or humankind's search for meaning. So it was here, under the microscope of scientific thinking, that the DNA of purpose model was born. So let's take a little look and a deep dive into this concept to understand DNA as both a metaphor to decode human purpose, Now, DNA is the hereditary material in humans and almost all other life. And in its simplest form, this code is why we are a certain shape, have unique features, or even carry a genetic condition. Now that's the science, but for now I want to dive into DNA as a metaphor to unlock a framework by which you can explore your purpose. So let's kick off with the obvious. Your DNA is what makes you who you are. And identical twins aside, it is 100% unique to who you are. And guess what? So is your life purpose. One of the things I love about both science and the study of genetics is that they can't lie. They are the keepers of the absolute truth. And even when we try and cover up the facts, in the wise words of Buddha, three things cannot long be hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Now, if your eyes are green, they are green. Or if you are a certain height or shape, that is who you are. You can accept it or fight it, but it is what it is. And purpose is no different. Let me put it to you this way. I absolutely love music, but I have no idea about how to read a note. So Even though I love music, my purpose is not to be the next Mozart. It is unlikely that a small or petite person will become a world champion sumo wrestler. Now, these examples may seem extreme, but the essence of this idea is that purpose is found in profound truth, self-love, and self-acceptance. We must learn to accept ourselves for what we are instead of trying to be something we are not. In the same way we must learn to accept our physical bodies, we must also learn to accept our bodies of purpose. One of the coolest things about DNA is that we inherit it. So I am often amazed looking at my 2-year-old daughter, Tiger Lily, and seeing in her literally a hologram of genetics. In her case, she amazingly has bright blue eyes, even though my partner and I and our parents all have brown or hazel eyes. My grandfather had blue eyes, as did my partner's grandmother, and that one gene sequence traveled through 2 generations for my daughter to have blue eyes. Our genes are so much bigger than us, and so is our purpose. Purpose is something we inherit via culture, values, belief systems that are passed down. Now, the human brain is literally hardwired for storytelling, and the stories passed down through generations directly influence our connection to and our expression of personal purpose. DNA holds our genetic story. Purpose holds the story of meaning. Both are inherited and both are passed down, which brings me to my next point. Now, just like DNA, we also pass on purpose. That's right. Our purpose can exist above and beyond our existence in it. And another word for this is legacy. So to give you an example, in a perfect world, a child will outlive a parent, but the parent's DNA also lives on in the child. In the world of purpose, we may work for years within an organization and in doing so pioneer a role or build the processes and structures that make up that role. And this is especially true in leadership. Therefore, our purpose lives on in that role. Likewise, we spend time mentoring or coaching a young person in a skill. Our purpose lives on in that child's life and through that expression. Purpose is a legacy, and its expression is greater than us as individuals, just like our DNA. More coffee as we evolve. Please feel free to stand up, jump around, turn around, go to the toilet, do whatever it is you need to do, because I know I'm giving you all a lot of content today. I'd also encourage everyone to grab a piece of paper and write notes as your brain really starts to unpack the connection for you between DNA and purpose and starts using this framework to think about your purpose in a different way. Now, earlier we covered off the idea that traditionally purpose has often been spoken about as a static anchor, something set in stone that becomes our guiding light. It is the unwavering presence of the North Star guiding us on our journey into the unknown. Today, I want to continue to challenge this belief system and argue that aspects of purpose do, in fact, evolve based on the environment, and that purpose itself is something we connect to in the present moment rather than being something outside of ourselves or in front of us. So let's loop back into the world of science for a moment as our baseline. Now, some of you may have heard of survival of the fittest, and this is a phrase that originated from Darwinian evolutionary theory as a way of describing the mechanism for natural selection. The idea suggests that organisms who have the most adaptability to an environment are the most successful in surviving and reproducing. The outcome is a gradual change to the DNA of a species over many generations. In essence, those with the ability to adapt are those with the ability to progress and to move forward. Let me also say this. In 2020, we have also seen that adaptability is literally a superpower in leadership. So it's good news that this skill is innate to what it means to be human. In 2015, a study was conducted by the Journal of Scientific Reports who analysed the DNA of an Inca boy who researchers believed was sacrificed to the gods more than 500 years ago. The boy was believed to be 6 or 7 years old, and his frozen, naturally mummified body was found high in the Andes in 1985. In this study, researchers found evidence of the genetic diversity that predated the Spanish conquest. As a part of the study, Spanish geneticists extracted DNA from a small portion of the boy's lung, and then they compared his genetic information with hundreds of thousands of samples held in a genetic database. They found only 4 matches. The Inca boy's DNA identified him as a part of a previously unknown offshoot of an ancient Native American lineage, which was one of the first to emerge among the humans who crossed the Bering Strait and spread into North and South America some 18,000 years ago. Even today, incredibly, there is still evidence available suggesting that natural selection has recently made changes and continues to do so. Our DNA shows evidence for recent selection for resistance of killer diseases like Lassa fever and malaria. Selection in response to malaria is still ongoing in regions where the disease remains common. So, what can we learn from all of this? Just like our evolution, DNA will always provide a baseline for a species to evolve, and purpose will also provide us a baseline in rapid change. What evolves is based on what we need in order to survive an environmental change, in order to survive rapid change. And we, in today's world, need to get really, really good at this. But the good news is the ability to do this already exists within us. So how do these ideas interlock with our understanding of purpose? Do any of you remember what life was actually like before COVID? It feels like freaking ages ago. It's hard to, believe that this rapid wave of change only came about for us in February of 2020. In my life before COVID-19, I was busily delivering on my purpose of decoding purpose, but my mechanism was predominantly on speaking stages or in consulting rooms, amazing petri dishes for the spread of an infectious virus like COVID. This webinar and the virtual forums I've been a part of over the last few months are a direct reflection of how my purpose has evolved. In these crazy times, we have collectively faced the biggest crisis to hit the globe in over a century. A virus that is not only taking our lives, but also our livelihoods and in some cases, our freedom. Here we see survival of the fittest on steroids, physically, emotionally, and mentally. Just like our ancestors, it has been those with the ability to pivot in their mechanism for purpose that have actually survived and quite possibly thrived. If we look around us, the human beings who are acting purposefully and who are taking action to adapt and evolve in these unprecedented times are those who are present and in service. Consider the role of our healthcare workers, police, teachers, aged care workers, and love them or hate them, even our politicians. Look at the businesses around you. How are they dealing with the crisis? Whether it's overcoming the challenges of economic shutdowns or navigating technological disruption in the workplace, all of us as people, communities, businesses, and governments are being forced to grapple with more change than ever before in human history. Well, at least for the last 100 years. The challenge is to take in the available information, act responsibly, and evolve accordingly. Because regardless of how we feel about some of the world's largest question marks right now, global pandemics, artificial intelligence, protests, or climate change, we should remember that reactions that come from fear are rarely ever the solution. And purpose enables us to turn that fear into hope. Fundamentally, the people, organisations and communities who are adapting in the face of the unknown are doing so with what I refer to as the principles of purpose in evolution. And these principles provide a checklist designed to enable you to act with purpose, to act purposefully in the present moment so that you can adapt and create a new pathway forward. And I'd really invite you to pick up a pen and write this down. 3 principles that seem so simple, but can really provide such an incredible depth of clarity. And it is this: how can I use what I do to help the world? How can I use what I know to heal the world? How can I use my voice to build hope again? I think it's also wise to remember that if your compassion does not include yourself, it's incomplete. This has been an incredibly difficult time for everyone. And it may be that in these times, you need to extend these three principles of purpose in evolution to yourself. So yes, this is a picture of me dancing in a forest, looking like a wild gypsy child, and you can absolutely ask me about that later. We've just spoken about the links between our DNA and purpose. So from here, I want to dive into another layer, and it's the layer of epigenetics. And yes, this is me dancing in the forest, and you can ask me about that later. But for now, this image, I am using this purely as a metaphor to help you to understand the idea of epigenetics and purpose. So just like putting these headphones on, we are literally receiving information coming in from the world around us that informs how we evolve and step into purpose. This fundamentally influences how we dance in this world. Now, in short, epigenetics describes the DNA modifications that do not change the DNA sequence, but that can affect the gene activity or how the gene expresses itself. So I once had a friend describe this to me as eating the same potatoes with different toppings. The potato stays the same, but how it tastes is completely different based on the topping. So what's the topping made of? In the study of epigenetics, it is the chemical compounds that are added to single genes, which in turn regulate their activity. In the same way the topping is not part of the potato, the chemical compounds are not a part of the DNA, but they do have the ability to turn the genes on or to turn the genes off, and can influence the production of proteins in certain cells, ensuring that only necessary proteins are produced. So where does all of that lead? The reality is that the study of epigenetics is in its infancy, but studies show potential links between lifestyle factors and gene epigenetics. Lifestyle meaning that the environment you live in, the diet you follow, the quality of the foods you consume, and your stress levels. And just as negative emotions like stress might be influential in the epigenetic realm, positive emotions can also be just as powerful. Now, while at this point, the evidence is still fundamentally underpinned by more questions than answers, studies conducted in 2018 explored the idea that our life experiences may be passed on to our children and our children's children. Studies on survivors of traumatic events have suggested that exposure to stress may indeed have lasting effects on subsequent generations. Now, it's easy to connect the dots between how lifestyle factors influencing our physical, emotional, or mental health would also affect our ability to live with purpose. After all, we exist within bodies of purpose, and our physical health determines our ability to express that purpose. So when it comes to the epigenetics of purpose, the conversation becomes a little more complex in that we begin to address how our ancestors' health, wealth, culture, beliefs, and values have fundamentally influenced who we are and our ability to express ourselves in the world. One of the oldest discussions in psychology is that of nature versus nurture. And the burning question is whether our behaviors are learned or inherited. Science can accept the inheritance of some behaviors. So the real question is then gaining insights into which ones are inherited and which ones are learned and to what extent. Regardless of whether it is nature or nurture, there is no denying that there are epigenetic factors at play, and that those factors, whether they relate to our physical health or to the health of our purpose, do influence the full expression of who we are in the world. That said, it's important to feel empowered in the knowledge that you are the master of who you are. And that regardless of how life has shaped you, and you know, we've all been through difficult things that are in some cases beyond our control, how we evolve is always in our hands. The ability to go deep, to heal, and to shed the skins of the past in order to create a more empowered and beautiful future lies in whether we are willing to do what is required to be all of who we already are. Think about it this way. How would you feel if you looked back on your life and you only lived to 30% of the capacity of all of what you could be? How would you feel about that? The future of leadership is much more about being the leader, much more than simply about being a leader. It's about being the leader of you and truly owning your capacity to show up and shine in this world. As a starting point in understanding the epigenetics of purpose, I have listed the 5 key areas that I would examine with regards to understanding the influence of epigenetics. The first one here is proximity. You know, who you spend time with is who you become. It's evolutionary. Why? Because the sharing of intention was an important factor in the evolutions of a human's unique cognitive abilities. It's how we formed bonds and got jobs done within our tribes. Basically, this shared intentionality today continues to bind us together, which is why it is so important to increase our awareness of whether that shared intentionality is supporting the expression of our purpose and our potential, or whether it is actually robbing us of vital life force. The second one here is programs, or what I call programs of the past. And whether it be cultural beliefs, religious beliefs, or value systems, they each hold stories that fundamentally influence who we are as a human being. And there is a reason why these stories are so powerful. And really, it comes back to human evolution. A study has found the first real-world evidence that human beings evolved into storytellers because storytelling gave us the evolutionary edge. At the end of the day, our brains are hardwired for story, and this is a big part of how we connect with a deeper sense of purpose. And I think from an evolutionary perspective, this is exciting. But what happens when the stories we are told or the behaviors that we are learning are not positive? There is a range of life experience and family circumstances, both positive and negative, that will fundamentally impact the quality of our lives, our resilience, and our ability to cope if we are exposed to negative experiences. These experiences and circumstances, along with the stories we are told and then believe, also fundamentally influence how we connect with purpose. Now, the third epigenetics of purpose is what I call place and space. We spend 90% of our time indoors, and the buildings where we live, work, relax, and learn deeply impact our health, well-being, productivity, and our ability to connect with purpose. So the question you need to ask is your home or workplace supporting the expression of your purpose? Next here we have progress, or what I call progressive stimulus. And this is the idea that we all want to be happy, but have you ever considered that the pursuit for a permanent state of happiness is in fact a myth? And it's certainly not what purpose is. The pursuit for happiness is often a goal, but research shows that it is physiologically and psychologically impossible. Real life shows us that it is completely normal to experience a full range of emotion. Some feelings are positive and some are negative, but we find purpose and meaning in this kaleidoscope of feeling. And as we've explored today, sometimes it is the turning points. Sometimes it is in crisis, in the most difficult times, that we truly catalyze purpose in our lives. So if we are seeking out a life of purpose, then we need to ensure we are in a state of progress. Self-esteem and fulfillment comes from courageously tackling and evolving over the top of struggle and challenge. And finally, we have planetary influence. When we look at one of the most important drivers of purposeful change, it is what is happening in the world around us. Whether it is artificial intelligence, global pandemics, or climate change, what is happening on our planet will influence how we connect with ourselves and the world. If we loop back to why human beings evolve, it is because of environmental change. Today, what's changing might look different, but the evolution process is the same. In order to evolve, we must adapt. We are living in a world where social change, geopolitical change, and climate change are converging. They are coming together. The landscape is increasingly uncertain, but what we do know is that fear does not lead to new solutions. And with that in mind, modern day adaptation asks us again to connect more deeply with our purpose. We must stitch a new garment. We must be pioneers of a new future. So in coming to the last part of today's webinar, we need to ask the question, where do we connect more deeply? How can we connect more deeply with purpose? Mahatma Gandhi said this: if you want to change the world, start with yourself. And starting with yourself is where we start to bridge the world of science and spirituality, or to use different wording in order to not get caught up in the labels if you don't consider yourself a spiritual person. It's about having a connection with our inner self as one of the most important gateways to purpose. So far today, we've explored how DNA and purpose are metaphorically linked, and we have also explored the evolution and epigenetics of purpose. But there is still something within these ideas that creates a direct link between both science and spirituality, and that is the link to energy. The idea that everything, including us, is made of energy. So whether you love science or not, most of you would have heard of the Big Bang. That's right. That moment in time, approximately 14 billion years ago, when the entire universe was inside a hot, dense speck, 1,000 times smaller than a pinhead before, bang, suddenly exploding. All of the matter and antimatter that existed should have left nothing but energy, yet a small amount of matter survived. And as a result, we ended up in a world filled with particles whose masses and charges were precise enough to allow all life on Earth to emerge. It's fascinating to consider that about 99% of your body is made up of atoms of hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. The awesome part is that the hydrogen atoms in you were produced in the Big Bang, and the carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen atoms were made in burning stars. It's so cool. And this is all of the reasons why I'm a science nerd. The very heavy elements in you were made in exploding stars, otherwise known as supernovas, hence the name of my business, the Supernova Tribe. As it turns out, the idea of the North Star of purpose existing within you is based on more scientific evidence than you could have ever considered might actually be possible. What is interesting about these atoms inside of us is that the nuclei of the atoms are around 100,000 times smaller than the atoms they're housed in. For example, if the nucleus was the size of a peanut, the atom would be about the size of a football field. Just have a think about that. So what do you think exists in that dead space in between? Kinetic energy, produced from the motion of the electrons surrounding the nucleus of an atom. In fact, if we literally removed all of the energy that exists within human atoms, the entire human race would fit into the volume of a sugar cube. That's crazy thought. So just for a minute, as we close off today, I want to invite you to lean into some curious thinking with me. If we can accept the idea that we are all made of energy from a scientific standpoint, that energy is what exists in the space in between the atom and the nuclei, then we could also entertain what mystics from various traditions have spoken about for centuries. And that is the idea that there is an energy known as prana that also exists within us and around us. So what is prana? Prana could be described as the electricity that charges our reality. There is prana or life force energy in raw food, nature around large bodies of water, and around yoga masters who have enhanced their life force or energy field through a consistent and dedicated yoga practice. In Japan, for example, there is a practice called Shinrin Yoku, which translates to taking in the forest atmosphere or forest bathing. And there's an incredible body of research around why this is so beneficial to humankind. And the idea behind forest bathing is that it enables, by way of soaking up the rainforest prana chi, a sense of well-being. We become healthier human beings. Now, I think it's important to note that prana cannot be measured at this time from a scientific perspective. However, its interaction with the biosystem has been the study of in both Ayurveda and subject of study in both Ayurveda and yoga. And even the definition of death itself is based on the loss of prana. Qi, the equivalent of prana in traditional Chinese medicine, is claimed to be measured through instruments, and its loss has been observed at the time of death. Electrons have also come under study recently on the health of individuals. So here we have a complex and yet unexplored area of subtle energies that impacts health and that has actually been useful in defining what death is. So in coming back to the core essence of this webinar, what does energy have to do with our personal connection to purpose? And my personal belief is that purpose, the feelings that we experience when we are on purpose, the joy that we feel, is in fact an energy in motion. Some of you may prefer to think of that energy as kinetic, where others may prefer to call it chi or prana. Either way, you can think of our bodies like batteries, where we either charge ourselves up with purpose or we let ourselves go flat. To connect the ideas that we have been discussing, if we understand that everything consists of energy and that energy exists around us and within us, then we can also see the link between this energy and our DNA. The DNA provides the code or the direction, enabling the unique expression of both our atoms and the energy within those atoms. The DNA of purpose is no different, providing the code or the direction, enabling the unique expression of the energy, chi, prana, that is passing through you. As we have discussed, there are epigenetic factors that influence how that DNA is expressed, but ultimately, DNA is the code for life. To give you a more pragmatic metaphor, we are all familiar with the idea of data. And for those of you who are not, try picking up your mobile phone bill because I'm sure you have been charged for it. In a more technical sense, data is a set of values of qualitative or quantitative variables about one or more persons or objects. You can think of data as the energy or the life force. However, in order to give that data meaning, in order to make it useful, we need to apply what is referred to as an algorithm. An algorithm is a process or a set of rules to be followed in calculations or other problem-solving operations, especially by a computer. And the role of an algorithm is to process data in order to make it meaningful. So if meaning is what we are after in our lives, we can think of energy, prana, chi, whatever you prefer to call it, as the data. And we can think of our DNA as the algorithm that provides meaning in our lives. And our job is to choose to pick up that pen and to create that meaning in order to pioneer a new future. It has been such a joy speaking with you all today, and I have so much other content I would love to share with you. And as a part of that content, I actually have a 3-step process that I have labeled the DNA of purpose, which will enable you to walk through your past, to lean into the present moment, and then to use the DNA of purpose model, the ability to decide, to find a narrative and step into an alignment with purpose in order to be able to go deeper into the work that I have presented today. And I'd be really happy to share a questionnaire I have available that can help you to take some of the theory we've explored today and to be able to integrate it and apply it in your own personal adventure into remembering who you have always been, your purpose. Please check out my website, www.rebeccatat.com supernovatribe.com. And also, please do download the Decoding Purpose podcast at your favorite podcast hangout. Emma, it has been such a joy to join you all today. I'll hand the baton back to you in case there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was an incredible hour of content. And I wish I knew how your brain worked, because honestly, that was just so eye-opening. I don't imagine you sleep much. I feel like you would just be thinking and decoding and doing all that stuff all the time.
Well, yeah, I mean, in fairness, this content and the ideas I have about purpose have really emerged over the last 5 years. So whilst I've kind of consolidated some of those ideas today, the journey itself has been like peeling away layers of the onion. And my process in decoding purpose has very much been in a state of evolution. And it would be the same advice I'd give anyone listening to this podcast today, that purpose is a tool to be able to evolve, and it is a process that does reveal new layers as we move forward, and especially in times of change like 2020.
Yeah, for sure. Now, we've recorded this, of course, for our members, and I actually noticed a few members jump on at the end, and I'm wondering if that's because of daylight savings.
That could be possible.
Yeah, we had a few people come in the last 5 minutes. So if that's you, possibly because of daylight savings, we were starting at 11, and maybe that has affected where you are tuning in from. So I apologize for that. But the good news is, of course, we have recorded this for you, and we will be popping it up on the members' website. Within about 24 hours, we'll get that up for you. But that may be the reason that we had a few people jump on at a different time. But what we'll do now is we do have to wrap up. But Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us. For all our members, you will get that recording as soon as possible. If you have any questions, of course, reach out to the team. We can always pass those on to Rebecca as well.
Definitely. And feel free to email me at rebecca@supernovatribe.com should anyone need any more information.
That's perfect. We'll pop your details in the recording as well. But for now, we hope you all have a great Tuesday, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks so much again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.